A very warm welcome to each of you to Mindful on Wall Street's series with Jeremy Hunter. We're extremely delighted to have Dr. Jeremy Hunter join us today. My name is Lalita Badinihal from Credit Suisse. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Mindful on Wall Street for those of you who aren't familiar. Mindful on Wall Street is a grassroots collaboration of mindfulness champions across the financial services industry. And we really seek to amplify the reach of mindfulness within our respective institutions. And the main reason we do this is to really empower you all, which is why we are so excited to have Dr. Jeremy Hunter here with us today. We want to equip you with the tools that you need to handle your very intense jobs, but with ease. So many of you were here on last week at our kickoff session. And if you missed it, don't worry about it. On our Mindful on Wall Street website, we do have a replay that Dr. Jeremy Hunter has kindly allowed us to share. So you have that memory with you always. Today will be our second in a four-part series, and Dr. Jeremy Hunter will tell you more about that. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeremy Hunter. For those of you who may not know him, he pioneered one of the first mindfulness-based approaches which is focused on personal mastery. And what does that really mean? He really redefined what productivity means, and he brought in how to cultivate the quality of our minds and harness our minds for day-to-day actions and interactions we have. So it's very, very practical. Jeremy is the founding director of the Executive Mind Leadership Institute at the Drucker School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. He has been voted Faculty of the Year 8 times by his students. And when he was faced with a life-threatening disease and needed to get organ donation, many of his students came forward as organ donors. Jeremy received his PhD from the University of Chicago under the direction of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the author of Flow, who some of you may have heard of. So without further ado, it is really my pleasure to turn this over to Dr. Jeremy Hunter.
Okay, thanks. And again, thanks to the Mindfulness on Wall Street team for putting this together. They are a crack group. And thank you to all of you for coming back. In fact, that's one of the questions I want to know about, which is in the chat box, there is a link which I've put in. If you could click on that, that will take you to a poll. Okay, great. How many people were here last week? Just so that I know. Leave it up just for a second. Longer. I love this live polling. It's so fascinating. So the vast majority. Okay, great. So then next question. What's one word to describe your inner experience of uncertainty? There we go. It's great. Wow. Immobilizing. Improvement. Yeah. Improvement and growth. It depends. I love it. So let's see, what else is here? Fear. All right, what are some words? Challenge. Okay, the bigger the word, the more people are using it. Yeah, if I can switch this. This is a cluster. Let's see if this will change it. There we go. All right, anxiety, biggest one. All right, anxiety by far, and then opportunity, kind of a second, but not a close second. But look at all the words. They're more kind of difficult words than they are easy words, aren't they? So what are we going to do? I had originally thought we could talk about a deeper dive into uncertainty and the nature of uncertainty. But when I looked at the results from last week, when I asked the question, what did you want from this experience? Here are the answers. And, what I realized, okay, manage the feeling of overwhelm. How do I stay focused in the clutter? I want more positivity. Clarity, clarity, clarity showed up. Calm, calm, calm showed up. How to quiet the worry, how to stay sane. After I read this, and this is representative of the vast majority of the responses, I realized, oh, there's a lot of inner churn going on. And maybe before we move forward, we need to really address that, address how do I manage this chaos that's going on, inside. And then the word that really caught my eye was somebody put wholesomeness. And, as the father of a 4-year-old boy, I think about that a lot. It's not exactly the most fashionable word, right? But, we're yearning for some kind of unbridled goodness in a world that seems to be, coming apart at the seams, or at least it can feel that way. And so how in that kind of chaotic external condition, do we find some source of goodness to tap into? And as a parent, I think about that for my son all the time. How do we give him a strong foundation in wholesomeness so that he can go out into this world and deal with it in an effective way? And so that really moved me. So instead of what I thought we were going to do when this planning for this was an abstract exercise, what we are actually going to do is switch some of the order of things. And what I wanted to do was kind of talk about this now rather than later. And so today will be a little bit more practice oriented than last time. And so what I'd like to do, we'll do a quick review. And then what I want to talk to you about are 3 principles for managing your inner game. And oftentimes people ask me, hey, give me some tips or tricks to manage my mind, Prof. And, I'm not really a tips or tricks sort of guy. I think I work at the level of principle. And, just as an accountant has GAAP, or an investor has, the fundamental principles for what investment means, that those things are there to guide you when things aren't clear, right? And in the way that tips or tricks doesn't really do justice to. And so I think if you understand what are the fundamental principles that you need to know, that once you understand that, then you can draw on that in your own way and in the moment and way that's appropriate for you. And so we're going to go to principles, and you'll start to see how the principles are practical. So, it's not just abstractions, but how do you bring these principles into your life in a very concrete, useful way. Okay, so it's tips or tricks, but rooted in something that is more timeless. And I think that for you, that ultimately is going to be more useful and interesting. And then we will talk, so 3 principles for managing the inner game. And then we'll do some experiments or explorations on how do you actually create energy and clarity. And then we'll kind of cue it up for next time, okay? So that's the game plan. So let's do a quick review, right? For the 20% or so of you, who weren't able to watch the first session, my experience of doing this work really was formed in living with the uncertainty of chronic illness, chronic terminal incurable illness for nearly 2 decades. And so for me, this kind of work is really a life or death sort of thing. It's not a light sort of topic that I just happened to get interested in, and here I am, right? But really, and I realized what is it really about for me? And it was about being served up a certain kind of scenario, 90% chance of mortality within 5 years, and to say, okay, if that's the parameters, how do I create options in this? How do I create options for myself in what seems to be a very bleak picture? And so I think that the intention and thrust of this work is geared towards how do you create options for yourself when it doesn't seem like there are any other options, or the options that are there are not particularly palatable. And so I think that orientation in a way inherently makes it practical. So how do you do that? How we do that is understanding we have two games to play, right? There's the outer game of being effective in the world, right? Like what you do as a professional, or what you do as a as a as a partner, or as a parent, or as a son or a daughter, right? Or as a friend, right? The outer game that we have to deal with in this world. And then there's also the inner game, right? Like what's going on inside you, right? Which are the belief systems you have, the emotions you're experiencing, even the sensations in your body that are informing like how you take action. And for many of us, that whole process is invisible, right? And as we talked about last time, most professional education focuses primarily on the outer game. The leader and I were talking earlier about what MBA education was like, and it was all about calculations and derivatives and how do you manage an M&A and all that sort of stuff. And what's left out is lived reality of what that's like. And so, in my way of thinking, we have to be able to do both, right? It can't just be the inner game, because that's oftentimes not connected to the outer world. And it can't just be the outer game either, because it's not referenced in your own experience. And then ideally, like, how do you do this now? How do you do it in real time? And that's, I think, what we aim for. It's not the assumption that you should be able to do this now, but we aim for that. So my way of working focuses not just on a meditation practice, but also like, how do you integrate this into your life, and how do you use your life and the craziness of your life as a way to refine yourself? That's the place where it gets interesting and juicy, and that also you see the results right away. And that when we do that, I like to reference my colleague Lily Powell at the University of Virginia. We co-teach a class called Leading Mindfully at the Darden School, which I did this morning actually. And she's fond of quoting Ken Chenault, who I'm sure you know. But the role of the leader is to define reality and give hope, right? The role of the leader is to define reality and give hope. And if that's true, right, that's much harder to do if you don't know what's going on inside you, right? If you don't know what's going on inside you, then how do you craft a vision to help other people kind of create choices for themselves, so that the result that you get ultimately is one that might be better than if you had just gone on a knee-jerk reaction, right? So unintentionally, inadvertently, non-consciously, mindlessness forecloses options. And what we're trying to do here is to bring a level of attention, or bring a level of awareness to what you're experiencing right now, so that you can create options that you didn't realize were necessarily present at first glance, right? So, and then especially, right, in times of uncertainty, what does that look like? How do you manage both games? And that's what I want to talk about today, okay? So 3 principles for managing the inner game. And again, principles are timeless, right? They're foundational, and we build our house on this foundation. And so principle number 1 is simply to acknowledge, what are you experiencing right now, right? What are you experiencing? And so, let's practice just right now, like right now, what's happening in your body, right? If you had to put your attention, let's put your attention in a specific place. Let's put your attention in your lower back, right? What's happening in your lower back, right? What do you notice? Is there tension? Is there looseness? Is it relaxed? Is it tight, right? And if you had to shift from the lower back, right, up to your shoulders, what's going on there? Or your neck, or the back of your head, or even your jaw, right? Just notice what's there, right? Anxiety was something that people mentioned a lot of, right? And right, how do you experience anxiety? I know in my experience of anxiety, when it was really intense, it was like you had inadvertently grabbed onto a live electric wire, and that you couldn't let it go, that there was this charge of energy, and it felt really in control. But there was this kind of vibratory thing happening was my experience of anxiety. Right? But just notice what's happening in your body. You don't have to push it away. You don't have to make it do a certain thing, but just notice what's there. Right? And then what are the emotions that are coming along with it? And you may be good or less good at this process, right? Everybody, this is a skill to learn, right? And if you look and you think, okay, I don't sense anything, you know, that's okay. Because where did you ever learn how to do this, right? Probably didn't learn it in business school. Right? Just notice what's there. Right? And then what happens when you give it a name? Oh, I notice I feel immediate boredom. Why did I do this with my day? I could have, there's another webinar happening somewhere else, isn't there? Right? So what's there? Just notice what's there. And then notice, what are the stories you're telling yourself? What are the stories that are going in and out of your head? Or what are the narratives that are happening? Right? And so when we incorporate a kind of higher quality of attention, a more active attention into daily life, right? You can just ask yourself questions like, what's going on right now? And then that gives a kind of ballast to what's the next thing I'm about to do, right? Is the choice I'm about to make one that I actually want to make? Is this the direction that I'm headed into? Or is there somewhere else I want to go? Right? Lolita and I were talking right before we started, like, you know, sometimes it's as simple as just doing something differently, just making a different choice. You know, I tell the people I work with, you know, if you suddenly find yourself at an intersection where you always turn right, what would it mean if you turned left today instead? Right? Or more practically speaking, the box of cookies you just walked past that you usually, or the box of cookies you know is on the counter right now, and are you going to go eat that box of cookies, or are you going to walk past the box of cookies, right? At some point, everything comes down to a moment. And what do you do in that moment? Right. So what are you experiencing right now? Right? And this is straight, hot off the presses from the Department of Big Words, right? What we are practicing is what's called interoception, right? Which is the skill of being able to sense this stuff that's going on inside you. Exteroception is all the stuff outside you. We're all probably pretty good at that, right? But interoception, right, is like just paying attention to what's happening inside, right? Nothing particularly mystical or weird about it. It's just like reading a different dial on your dashboard that we don't necessarily know how to read or have ever taught to read. And then there are other senses. There's proprioception, which is the sense of space or movement in the body. Nocioception, which is the sense of pain in the body. But exteroception, interoception are kind of what we're working with here when we talk about inner game and outer game. Right? How are you making sense of what's going on outside you? How are you making sense of what's going on inside you? Okay. So here's the science, some science around this. Is a growing body of research that shows like the more aware you are of what's going on inside you, the better you are to regulate yourself, to be aware of what's going on, right? To reduce stress and all of that sort of stuff, right? And it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in general, right? And that the less aware you are of that, right, then you tend not to go in a good direction. And again, the metaphor I like to think about is you're driving down without interoception to inform you about how you're experiencing the world. It's like driving down the freeway with a big piece of cardboard over the windshield, right? So we're trying to get a better view of what's going on inside, right? And that oftentimes we're not even aware of what's going on inside. This is a quote from a leader I received after a program, and she said, "Oh, I did this for my team, but I didn't realize how much I needed it for me too." Right? Because oftentimes we don't really sense what's going on inside because we're oriented around action. Then we get to principle 2. So principle 1 is just acknowledging what's going on inside. So what happens when we acknowledge what's going on inside? Step 2 is like just accept the fact, okay, right now this is what I'm experiencing. Right? It's really uncomfortable, but this is what I'm experiencing. And that when we don't accept it, right? And what we're talking about is the experience inside, accepting the experience inside, not necessarily the experience outside, right? This isn't like a message to say, hey, if you're in a broken or abusive relationship, just accept it and it's going to go away. And that's not what we're saying. What we're saying right now is that, like, what's happening, accept the fact that right now inside you're feeling angry, or you're feeling bored, or you're feeling frustrated, or you're feeling anxious, right? And that when we resist that or fight it or deny it, that amplifies the sense of struggle, right? Fundamental principle, right? Accepting inner experience allows it to flow on. And when we resist it, it creates struggle. Right? This is from a leader I received last week. Like, it was like a light bulb went off in her head, and she said, oh, for the past 5 months, I've been trying to outrun COVID. And I realized, you know, that the resistance I've been giving to this thing that is happening is like, you know, I'm creating my own problem, right? There's COVID that I have to deal with, and my resistance to it that is creating, you know, that is amplifying the churn I'm experiencing, right? So, right, and again, here's the research that backs this up, right? So not only do we have to have interoception to help us see what's going on inside, but we bring a level of acceptance to that that allows that to flow, right? So basically, right, accepting what you're feeling helps you keep it together. And so 3 ways of managing reactive emotions. How do we deal with it? One way we deal with it is we push it away, or we pretend it's not happening, right? And a lot of professionals do this, and a lot of men do this, quite frankly, right? So we push it away, pretend it's not happening. Or I amplify it and I spill it out into the environment, right? Either I amplify it in my own head, right? So I see see a headline and say, okay, oh, stock market went down. I take that one bit of data and start extrapolating. What does that mean, right? There goes my retirement, right? That's the catastrophization. Or the other thing we do is take these emotions and spill them out into the environment, right? Right? The suppressor pushes them inside themselves. The spiller just gives it to you, right? So, or, you know, what we're talking about is a third way, like, how do you accept it? How do you allow it? How do you surf with it? And this is a skill we build up. It's not something that you read a book and you're able to do it. And we'll talk more about this next week. So push away, grasp or amplify, accept and allow, right? We have three choices. This is from a new client of mine who's a managing partner of his firm. And he says, I only have 2 emotions, right? Because number 1, no emotion. Number 2, explosive anger. That's all I got, right? And he had a good sense of humor about it. But that's a clear case where, okay, what we're going to do is build up interoception. So he starts to see, in fact, he has more than 2. And if you know him well, he's a really great guy, right? So his story about himself is not that accurate, but how he gets there, right? No emotions is really him suppressing his emotions. And then at some point you get containment failure, and then he spills it out into the environment. And so how do we, as we talked about last week, how do we have a more sophisticated way of managing and dealing with this stuff? This is from a colleague of mine whose husband is a doctor who was a kind of classic suppressor. And then afterwards she went home, talked to him about this, and then she wrote back saying, he started to accept the fact that he felt anxious, and his acceptance of that helped him bounce back quicker, right? And he was kind of puzzled. It's like, why doing this at the end of the day made him feel calmer and more in control, right? And so when we try to push the emotions away, they push back harder. And when we allow them to be there, with skill and practice, depending on the intensity of the emotion, right, things can start to shift, okay? So, question for you. What happens if you let go of the assumption that suppressing emotions makes you strong, right? What happens? And it doesn't mean you spill them out all over the place, but what happens if you make space for the fact that, okay, right now, here's what you're experiencing, okay? And then also accept the fact that, in a given day, your mood might go up and down. I mean, I know mine does, right? So, right, not to be surprised by that, because we are all in this kind of global churn together. Of course it's going to go up and down, right? So then principle 1, acknowledge what you're experiencing. Principle 2, accept what you're experiencing. Principle number 3, attention needs somewhere good to go. This is one of my core axioms. And, how do we use our attention, right? What are you giving your attention to, right? Something we probably don't think about, but what do we give our attention to, right? And are you obsessing about things that are out of your control? And does that help you, right? So I'm not giving you any answers, but I do have questions. And the question I'd like you to ask yourself is like, if you're obsessing about things you can't control, does that actually help you, right? Or what's the result, right? What's the result of that? And is that a result you wanted? And again, we'll talk more about results next week. And so, as Lilita mentioned in the beginning, right, quality of life and quality of attention are intimately interlinked. And one of my axioms is that your life is what you give attention to, right? Like, what are you giving your attention to? And how intentional are you about that? And is what you give attention to feeding you in some way, right? So again, it's just something to think about. And I thought it might be helpful to know, since I do teach at the Drucker School of Management, and Peter Drucker was considered to be the founding father of the discipline of management. He was also, I thought it might be interesting to know what he did. And you might know he was a great collector of Japanese art. And when he lived in Washington during the Second World War. And there were long stretches of the war where it did not look like it was going to go well for the Allies. And he said, what he would do would go to the Asian Art Museum to go look at the Japanese art. And he said, I made it a regular practice, and that helped to recover my sanity, right? It helped recover my sanity and perspective of the world. Right? So when somebody in the question, answering the question, what do you want from this, right? Help me stay sane and give me clarity, right? The non-intuitive answer that Drucker had to that was to say, go look at beauty, right? Go look at beauty. He wrote extensively on his experience of Japanese art. And so one practice I have had, and one thing that I noticed is, that once you start to do this work, right, we start to naturally attune ourselves to what's beautiful around us. And so like even right now, wherever you are, look around, right? Look around at what's beautiful right now. And as a culture, I think we have undervalued the nourishing role that beauty can play in our lives. And I don't mean this in any like trivial way. If you Google beauty, right, you either get tips on how to make yourself more sexually attractive, or cultural arguments about whose definition of beauty counts or not, doesn't count. But the idea of beauty as a source of nourishment is something that I think we have stopped talking about. But when I realized that even my most overwhelmed man's man students spontaneously started to talk about the presence of beauty in their lives, and how, without any prompting from me, and how they have inadvertently ignored the beautiful in their lives, I knew, okay, this is something to pay attention to, right? And I can remember a particular person in mind, a real guy's guy, and in his homework, he started to write about how much beauty there is in his life, how many beautiful meals he gets to eat, how many beautiful places he gets to go, how many interesting people he gets to meet in his work that he just takes for granted. And that when he steps back and actually pays attention to it, right, what happens, right? What happens? And so, again, for me, this is a non-trivial thing. And, when the what's the English phrase? When the chips are down, is that right? When the going gets tough, right? This is a skill I think that's essential to cultivate, or to cultivate even before the going gets tough, right? Because if you start to see only darkness in front of you, right, the capacity to see goodness or light or beauty becomes a survival skill, right? towards the end of my my pre-transplant experience, I had to drive 40 minutes to do dialysis every day, and it became a kind of discipline, driving myself to this place, being quite literally half conscious. I mean, I don't know how I didn't either kill myself or someone else, but I disciplined myself to say, okay, what's beautiful right now? Like, what's beautiful right now? And that gave me the energy to keep going. And so, and I can remember there was a certain day I was driving down the 2 freeway. If you know Los Angeles, the 2 freeway is the only freeway in LA that never gets congested. And there's this beautiful view of downtown LA. And I looked up and I said, oh, it's so beautiful. And I felt something like physically shift in my head. It was like something opened up. And I thought that was weird. But what went along with that was an incredible diminishment of fear. And I realized, oh, that was something powerful had just happened. And I didn't know what it was, but I realized, I think it had something to do with the disciplined, systematic cultivation of the awareness of what's beautiful in your life. And what's beautiful may not necessarily be art, right? It could be the color of the sky. I know with one Japanese client, what was beautiful for him was teamwork, and the aesthetic pleasure he derived in seeing a team in group flow, right? Which you can see in really great basketball. But he was thinking about his company, right? When all the team members kind of in this coordinated execution of their plan, he said that to me was so aesthetically satisfying, right? So beauty isn't just art, but you know, it could be your children, it could be your dog or cat, it could be, you know, the wrinkles around your parents' eyes. You know, think about what that is, right? Think about what that is, and not, you know, don't trivialize it or don't take it for granted. The other thing that and so, you know, this is again feedback from a leader I work with. You know, he said, oh, I felt after I started doing this, I felt like I pulled myself out of the cul-de-sac I'd driven myself into, right? And I got my energy back. I became more hopeful, right? So this isn't to say, like, ignore the difficult stuff that's going on, but rather let's expand our awareness to include, in the midst of all this difficulty, right, that there's also beauty, right? And I think it was Schindler's List. There's a sequence in the movie that's filmed in black and white, if I remember, and there's this little girl in red, right? And to me, that's what that little girl represented. You know, it's the kind of life force of what's possible. And so how do we attune ourselves to that? So, okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. How do we then create energy? And what I'd like to do is walk you through an exercise of how do we do this, okay? So I call this a meditation around who's got your back, right? So make yourself comfortable, and we'll kind of walk through it together, okay? So make yourself comfortable. Notice what's going on in your body right now. And if you're comfortable where you're at, you can close your eyes. All right, just notice what's in your body, what's happening in your body. And then I'd like you to bring to mind somebody in your life who's helped you. Right? Somebody, like, because of them, your life is better. Right? And maybe as you bring them to mind, see their face. Right? Or maybe hear their voice. Maybe their voice is saying your name. And then notice as you're bringing them to mind, like, how does this feel in their body? How does this feel in your body? And again, like, how is your life better because of their presence? right? Notice what might be changing in your body as we do this. What were the qualities of this person that were so beneficial for you? And as you bring them to mind, as you hold them in mind, right, notice what happens in the body. Now imagine that person standing behind you, still giving you their support. And then bring to mind a second person, somebody who's helped you, somebody whose presence in your life made your life better. Right, and see their face. And perhaps hear their voice saying your name. And notice as you hold them in your mind, how does it feel in your body? And again, what are the qualities they have that helped you? And again, notice what's happening in your body now. Where are there, what's shifting? Are there places that are pleasant or calm or spacious? And then imagine that person also standing behind you, joining your first person, standing behind you, giving you support. And then bring to mind a third person, somebody who's helped you, somebody whose presence in your life made it better. See their face. Hear their voice saying your name. And noticing how the thought of them, or the experience of them, expresses itself in your body. And imagining the qualities about them that made your life better? Right, and notice what are you experiencing in your body right now? What's changed? And then again, imagining that person joining the other two, standing behind you, supporting you. At least 3 people behind you. Now imagine all the other people who've supported you in your life standing behind you. And see their faces smiling at you. Maybe they're your ancestors. Maybe they're your family members, your neighbors, maybe even people you don't even know. This vast number of people whose efforts support your existence. And then notice, what are you experiencing in your body right now? Notice where you feel calm or pleasant or energized or alive or safe. And let your attention rest in that experience. You're not alone, and you've never been alone. Notice, what are you experiencing now? And now imagine, whose back can you stand behind? Who can you support? And what of your qualities can you lend to other people? So what are words that would describe what you're experiencing now? Powerful, warmth, calm and calmness, grateful, peaceful, gratitude. Look at that. Love. Wholesome. That's beautiful. These are all things that you already have, right? They're already there. We just forget. Right? We just forget. So all you had to do was just shift your attention and give your attention to the goodness that's already in your life. All right, take a look at that list. Look at how different it is from this one, right? Look at that. And compare to what you're experiencing now. That was 10 minutes. And all you had to do was think about something that you already have, right? We didn't have to go anywhere. We didn't have to astrally project to the Andromeda galaxy, right? It's just there. And so, when the going gets tough, right, how do you remember to put your attention here, right? And to connect back to that. So I'm curious to know, we didn't have time to do this next time, but for next time, what I'd like you to do is focus on this question, right? Like, how am I using my energy right now? How am I using my energy right now? And right, so just see what answer you come up with. This is just a cue for you to remember, right? Just a cue for you to remember, like, what's going on. And then just see what you find, right? There's no right or wrong. If you find that you're using your energy in a way that does not help you, do not be ashamed. Just say, okay, now where should I put my energy instead, right? It's not about perfection, right? Think about this as like you're learning how to play a musical instrument. And of course, that's mostly a process of making a bunch of mistakes while you slowly get better. So just use this as your cue. How am I using my energy right now? And let's see what you find, okay? So, curious to know, what was, and you can put this in the chat if you'd like, but what was valuable about today? And if you have questions, I will go to questions. Oh, thank you, yeah. It's extraordinary, thank you very much. Take on transcendental meditation as a tool to improve our mindfulness and awareness. Of course, there's a lot of different tools. So find what you are attracted to, and trust your own sensations, right? Trust your own gut about what attracts you. Alex, these practices are wonderful, but it can be hard to push ourselves to do them in moments of anxiety. What's a way to build this up? Just start doing it all the time. When you can, just notice. I kind of train myself to notice, okay, what's beautiful right now, even if it's the color of a book I can see across the room. Right? And I have a student who was really racked with anxiety, and she lived in Tokyo. She lived on one side of Tokyo and worked on the other side of Tokyo, and in Yokohama actually, and her commute was 2 hours a day on a train. And I met her in October, and I met her again in March, and I quite literally could not recognize her. And she had, in all honesty, just become radiant. And I asked her what this kind of face that was racked with anxiety and doubt and uncertainty. I said, what was suddenly smooth and beautiful? And I said, what'd you do? And she said, I just did this. Did what you talked about. Like I spent a half an hour on the train every day, looking out the window, seeing what's beautiful. And, gradually, what she said was, well, not only did I see what was beautiful, but the more I looked for it, the more beauty I found in my environment. And that it started to outweigh the fear and anxiety that I also experienced. And it also started to shift her perception of who she was. And so she was a humanities person working in this very technological firm. That's actually a firm you would all know. And she realized that in this technological firm, none of these techie guys could talk to one another, but she could talk to them. And she started to recast her role in the relation in her organization, which she had been considering quitting because she felt like the black sheep, or the thumb that stuck out in a way. She said, oh, I realized they can't talk to each other, but I can talk to all of them and I can connect them. And so she started to connect the people she thought should have conversations with one another. And they ended up developing new products and businesses from that. So, and now her life is totally different. And it was just by doing this thing, honest to God. So, Hosanna, I have a question. During the time at home, eventually it is harder to keep myself motivated and harder to get up every morning. Is there an exercise to push from the inside, as you said? Yeah, first of all, that's the answer to this is a much larger one than just this practice, right? Like, what are you doing for exercise? What are you doing for your diet? What kind of sleep are you getting? Excuse me as I knock my glasses off my own face. What's the quality of sleep you're getting? And, think about it as a whole package. I'll tell you that one of the deals I made with myself was that I was going to come out of COVID better than the me that went into it. So I largely stopped drinking caffeine. I stopped looking at my phone at night before bed because I realized the light was interfering with my sleep. The little mini trampoline we had bought years ago kind of was unearthed, and we pulled it back out. And, because we're still in this fire situation, we couldn't really go outside. And so I just spent half an hour on the trampoline every morning. And it's made a lot of difference. Went to see an acupuncturist. Something we'll talk about next week is like, how do you create support systems for yourself? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but yeah, let's see. I agree with Alex. Hard to do in moments of anxiety. I want to fight everything and struggle with acceptance, so that just amplifies the anxiety. Yeah, and so just play with it and see what happens, right? Play with it. As I said last time, right? I would hope that you not see this as a kind of, okay, eat your mindful spinach because it's good for you, but use it as play. See what happens. Right? See how the result shifts when you try some of these things, and approach it that mindset, and then start to see what opens up. And we'll talk about that more next week. So, all right, that's all for now. We will come back next week. Lolita,
thank you so much.
Throw it back to you, and we'll stop it.
What words do we have to describe that shift in energy that we all experienced right here, right now? And if there's anything you take away from this session, is that it's possible, and that it's a training, that it's a practice, and we are practicing all the time. And really grateful. You are a community. We do this for you, all our Mindful on Wall Street colleagues. We have day jobs, but we do this for you. You're coming really makes a huge difference to us. And we'd love to hear your feedback, how you found the session. As you saw, Jeremy adapted this session based on what he heard from you. So we will be tuning into your feedback, so please send it along.
Yeah, please
Thank you again. Thank you, Jeremy,
for Thanks, Lolita.
This is just amazing.
Yeah, take care. See you next week.